Hi, I'm Joe Finsternis, and today I'll be talking to you about a movie called Frankenhooker. Now, this movie was directed by a guy named Frankenhooker, who, before this, made a little movie called Brain Damage, as well as the entire Basket Case trilogy, which was probably his most famous work. I've never seen any of his other movies, so this was kind of my introduction to him. A few years ago, I saw the trailer for this movie and immediately wanted to see it. But from that, the way that they made it look, I expected the majority of the picture to be about the title character, Frankenhooker, just roaming the streets, causing mayhem, because that was what they concentrated on. But as it turns out, you don't even see her in all of her weird fetishist glory until almost an hour into the film. It's about this guy named Jeff who wants to become a doctor, but he was rejected from medical school, and his fiancée, Elizabeth Shelley, dies at the very beginning of the film in a very gruesome and very stupid sort of accident. So a lot of the time is spent watching him as he comes up with this plan to gather the perfect body parts to bring his girlfriend back from the dead, because the accident in question, which takes her life, doesn't leave much for him to work with. You know, he's able to gather her head, one of her hands, and one of her big toes. So it probably sounds a little boring from the way that I'm describing it, but the film actually has a really good sort of energy to it. I never got bored watching it, and it kept me entertained for sure. And despite being this really low-budget, cheesy sort of B-movie, I thought it was pretty well made. You know, the special effects aren't very high-tech. There are severed limbs in the film which look like props you would see at a haunted house attraction. But in the scene where Jeff is bringing Elizabeth back to life, they use these lightning effects, which I thought looked really cool, and the makeup effect on Frankenhooker herself looked very well done. Also, I loved the finale of the film, where there's this bad guy that surfaces late in the movie, and the final scene with him is just so bizarre and imaginative. I loved it. Also, the performances were fairly decent for the most part. You know, given the material that they had to work with, I thought that most of the cast did a pretty decent job. There was some really hammy acting from the woman playing Frankenhooker, especially during the very end of the film, but the movie's called Frankenhooker. So if you're going into this expecting anything about it to be Oscar caliber, then you need to reevaluate your judgment skills. One more thing I'd like to say is I did not expect these words to come out of my mouth, but Frankenhooker had some pretty good cinematography. This isn't something that I bring up very often. I'm not a huge cinematography geek or whatever, but there were some shots that I found pretty interesting. The big highlight being this one that follows a scene in which, you know, Frankenhooker's head is nearly torn off and it's just hanging there by the back of the neck. Jeff finds her and sort of rights her head, and there's this shot where he's walking her to the car, you know, holding her head in place. She gets into the car, into the passenger seat, then Jeff gets in, and the camera pans down. You see them both in the car, and as it takes off, you know, her head pops back off. So that was really cool. But yeah, you know, if you're into these cheesy sort of B-grade horror comedies and you haven't seen this one yet, you should definitely go check it out. I love the hell out of this movie. On the other hand, if you're going into Frankenhooker expecting, Rosemary's Baby, then you need to have your head examined. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I hope you all have a good one.